Welcome, welcome, welcome. I could not be more excited to moderate tonight's Q&A. I adore this movie, and so I'm so excited. I'm Lynette Howell-Taylor. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce two remarkable producers. Kevin Messick, please come, and the incredible Adam McKay. So I think, you obviously know these two fine gentlemen, but just a little bit of history on both of them. So they both worked on Vice together. You guys have been partners for, how long have you been working together?
About 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
And you've made a bunch of film and television and
Big Short and Succession and
Check out the new Lakers show.
the new Lakers show coming out in March. Yeah, a lot of stuff.
It's fantastic. So let's start with you, Adam. What was the idea that sparked this for you? Why this story?
So I had the moment which generates all ideas. Well, there's probably three different ways to approach an idea. And in this case, it was sheer terror. When I started reading the scientific reports that were coming in about climate change and the climate crisis, and I started seeing that it was way sooner than we had been told. I always thought it was 80, 100 years away. And with the UN report and a bunch of other reports, it was like, oh my God, this is like 10, 20 years away. And it was so strange to look at our media and the way we're talking about our lives and to not hear that, that I had this feeling of being gaslit or just out of reality, even though I kept seeing the science was very clear. And I just wanted to process that. And what came out of it was this idea of a comedy or a horror comedy. So that was kind of the impetus for it.
So talk about that as a genre. Like this is your gift. It's like your superpower. You use this genre to talk about complex social issues. What is it about the genre that you think makes it so effective?
So, one of the thoughts I had, and I talked to Kevin about this, was like, nothing is working right now. Like, in the last 5-10 years, I've seen a bunch of great movies, I've seen a bunch of great TV shows, but I'm not seeing anything from our news, from our leaders, from our arts that are bridging that gap, that are connecting with large audiences. And so the kind of idea behind this was, let's go for it. Let's see if there's a commonality that can exist. And the one commonality that I saw was that no matter who you were talking to, whether they were right-wing, left-wing, indifferent, we could all agree that the world was insane as we're experiencing it in the last 5 to 10 years. So that was kind of what really drove it, was the idea, could you make a world movie? Which was, really the effort behind this. And could you make a movie that could cross international borders and relate to all of us? And do we all know that we're being gaslit, that we're being fed news that is half the truth, that we're being told things that aren't entirely, and the BS that we're kind of hip deep in or chest deep in, could everyone identify with that? And one of the great things about this movie was once it came out, we saw it was like #1 in Pakistan, Nigeria, the Ukraine, Brazil, America, Canada. And we saw that in fact, people really did have this common feeling that there's something wrong and we're not being told the truth about it.
The movie's been nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including, yes, that's right, it does deserve a round of applause, including Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, Best Score, and Best Editing, and it's also nominated for the PGA Award for Outstanding Producer of Theatrical Motion Pictures. And you've been showered with awards across the board, and so it's obviously a real testament to the effect and the impact that the movie has had, but the movie is also divisive, and the movie has also pushed buttons and created real conversation. And why do you think that is, and do you think that that's an important part of you making this kind of a film?
Well, I'll turn it over to Kevin at a certain point, because Kevin is really the backbone of this movie. I mean, his producing on this is incredible. The only thing I'll say is, I don't know if any of us know what's going on right now. I think we've clearly turned the page into a new era, and I think there are a lot of people that want to cling to the old narratives. I think there are a lot of people that want to sort of just keep doubling and tripling down on what we've done in the past. But the whole goal of this movie was, can we tell a story in a different way? Can we break the narrative rules? The Sid Field screenplay book, which by the way is an incredible book, and very consciously with this movie, that was our attempt. And Kevin remembers this from my earliest drafts when we talked about it.
Yeah, I think in terms of genres, Adam defies that. And I think whether it was what he experimented with in The Big Short in terms of storytelling, and what you saw in Vice, where he chose to end the movie halfway through, where Dick Cheney wins the Iron Man, and history could have been averted if things happened differently, or even with the style of Succession, with some reprehensible family members that you love to watch every week. They don't really fit into a box. And I think what he attempted with his very first draft of Don't Look Up was, as he said, this incredible, inclusive, big event, disaster, satire, horror, comedy, that our hope was that would start a conversation. So the bummer was when the film first came out, there was a couple-week window where before it came out on Netflix, it had a theatrical window. And so the critics spoke during that 2 weeks. And that was one part of the conversation. And then the other part of the conversation was when the rest of the world saw it. And that became pretty energizing and exciting. So if the goal of the movie was to kind of raise awareness for some of the issues and themes that it spoke to, and to kind of kick you in the butt in terms of having a conversation, mission accomplished. Because the people that saw the movie, not just critics, but the world at large, and the climate scientists, who it kind of was a love letter to in terms of the way that Adam wrote it, they were the ones that it spoke to the most. And they're the ones that kind of warmed our hearts the most when we heard from them saying, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. When Jen Lawrence goes on TV and says we're all going to die and everybody makes fun of her, there's literally climate scientists in different countries of the world who've had that exact same experience by breaking down, becoming emotional, and having feelings about the end of the planet and being made fun of. So yeah, no, it was definitely an interesting journey.
It was crazy. I mean, it went from kind of this high to this low to this high to this debate, and in the end, I mean, what's very cool about it is that you realize it did exactly what it was supposed to do, even though I'm sure Kevin and I would have preferred a much smoother road. All the kind of body blows we took, and the ups and downs, and op-eds that were like for the movie and against the movie, and this kind of passionate love and hatred, and it was perfect. It was perfect. I mean, to be alive during these times, during 2022, you can't expect anything if you're going to try and talk about the world that we're living in now there's no such thing as a consensus piece of art. I mean, you got to do a period piece, or you got to do a remake, or you got to do a coming of age story, something that's very distant and far away. But if you're going to go into the kind of maelstrom that is what we're living through right now, you're going to take shit. And initially, it was surprising the amount of shit that we took. But at the end of the day, I've never been prouder of anything I've been involved in.
By the way, just try this on for a producer. So, okay, we're gonna bring you this movie. It's gonna cost you a lot of money. We're gonna put all these big stars in it. Oh, and by the way, the comet is actually gonna hit the Earth and everybody dies. But it's a comedy, and we want to release it at Christmas. Are you in? So, yeah, it was.
I'm gonna springboard from that. So is this sort of like the biggest canvas in terms of like, I mean, especially given the time you were making it, but in terms of visual effects, stars. I mean, you've obviously had a plethora of stars in your movies, but like nothing quite like this. I mean, these are like the biggest actors on the planet. Like when you first read this script, what did you think in terms of, okay, how are we gonna do this?
Well, Adam wrote it before COVID, so he came back over Christmas and he wrote incredibly fast because he had outlined the story, and he came back and he wrote it in like 3.5 weeks. And the draft that I read was like, this is fucking awesome, and we sent it to Jen Lawrence the next day because that's who he wrote it for, and she was in the next day. So we sold it it was January 20, so right before any COVID was really happening in the States. And COVID wasn't a concern, so it became the massive part of the production. But when we first sold it, we sold it to Netflix, and we were in Boston in the beginning of March prepping and scouting the movie, and then the world shut down, and we, like everybody else, all came home and stayed in our houses for the next 6 months trying to figure out what the heck we were going to do. COVID was the factor. The movie wasn't that complicated. It was the biggest star factor. It was big visual effects, but it was COVID shooting this that November in Boston, in winter, on the East Coast, and if you can remember this far back, before vaccines, so the only way to stay safe was to be so frickin' strict with everybody, and in being in everybody's business, from the movie star to the person that walked in with one line. It was just incredibly restrictive, solitary, and I think just a mental challenge. But in that challenge, we were all there together doing something and making something worthwhile, and that's kind of what kept us all going. We worked through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Everybody missed family events, birthdays, everything, and for kind of the common benefit of, all right, we're doing something worthwhile, and I think it kept us from going crazy during COVID.
How different is the post experience during the pandemic too?
I mean, after surviving what we did in Boston and making the movie, post was, I mean, it's just regular testing and things like that. But the hardest part in post, with all of the movies that Adam's made, is he really values the preview process. So that became a challenge in COVID because you could only have 50% capacity theaters, or depending on what the city regulations were, like whether it's Big Short or Vice or The Other Guys or Anchorman 2, like Adam really values that audience feedback, and so that was a challenge that we tried to kind of overcome during COVID. But post was fine. It just became more of a complicated puzzle. But getting 300 people in a theater, that was a challenge.
I mean, it was crazy because the first time we screened the movie, I've never been so nervous in my entire life, because we were ending the movie with the end of the world and all the main characters dying. And I kept telling Kevin, like, are we sure we want to do this in Orange County? and Kevin was like, Orange County is more balanced than you think. It's more 50-50. I was like, all right.
But by the way, we sat in Orange County with Michael Lewis, first screening of The Big Short, and it was more balanced, and it was being in a part of the state that understood and appreciated kind of what The Big Short was talking about. They loved it. So
they loved it.
They didn't love our first cut of this movie so much.
Well, but the big thing about the first cut of this movie was my entire fear was the ending, where you're blowing up the planet, killing all your main characters, and at the end, even in Orange County, their favorite part of the movie was the ending. And, no joke. And they were like, we are so tired of fake endings where everything works out. And I remember Kevin and I walked out and we were like, well, that's good news. But they were like, what does that mean for the future of mankind? Like, I mean, the fact that an audience is ready for the death of all mankind, and then they were like complaining that the beginning was too long. And it was incredible. It was, I always thought the ending would be the problem, and it wasn't. It turned out to be the favorite, highest rated part of the movie.
Yeah, we had struggles with Netflix saying, is there any other way you could end the movie? Could the comment maybe not hit?
During the script stage or during production?
No, after we sold it, all during production. The entire time we made it, until that night in Orange County.
And
After that night,
over.
when the movie played as strongly as it did, and when Timmy says the prayer, and when the world ends with grace and forgiveness and this incredible emotional moment, the Netflix, to their credit, was like, all right, we got it. It works. You can release a comedy at Christmas where everybody dies. We got it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So talk about the rest of the cast. So after you got Jan Lawrence, then how did you assemble everybody else? And was there an order to that? And how do you go about it?
This is the luxury of working with Adam. Every first choice actor he wanted is who he went to. So after Jen, we had just shot this pilot about the Lakers, and Rob Morgan, who plays Teddy Oglethorpe, plays Magic Johnson's dad. He wrote the part for Rob, sent it to Rob, he said yes. Adam had a crazy idea, well, Meryl Streep could be the president, maybe, I don't know. And so we sent it to Meryl, she's like, I'm in. The role of Jason Orlean, her son, was really only one guy that Adam thought could ever play that, and that was Jonah. They've known each other forever. Jonah read it, next day in. So that's kind of how it went, even down to when we approached who could play the biggest pop star in the world, maybe Ariana Grande. Done, in.
Well, I gotta give Kevin a lot of credit for that, because I was like, it should be an Ariana Grande like pop star. And Kevin was like, let's ask Ariana Grande. And then she was like, I'm in.
But it was, yeah, and then, you know, and the most fun, I think, pairing that's surprising in the movie is probably Cate Blanchett and Tyler Perry, who are just delightful to watch and just nailed the parts. And give something great for Leo to scream and yell at the end of the movie when he says, not everything has to be so polite, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. And talk about working with all of them in terms of your process with them on set. I've heard you like to improvise a lot. Like how do you go about directing that group of actors?
So, I mean, the great thing about actors like this, and I'm sure a lot of you have some familiarity with this, is that the reason they're great actors is because they're great collaborators. So when you're talking about Leo and Jen and Tyler Perry and Cate Blanchett and Meryl and Rob Morgan and all these great actors, they all showed up on set in the middle of the pandemic, happy to work. I mean, just happy to collaborate, happy to process emotions that were really difficult. I mean, it's still difficult at this time. I think it just came out the other day that we're well over 1 million have passed away from this pandemic. And like, so the pain that we've all experienced through this whole 2 years, these actors were so happy. I remember Meryl just telling me, like, thank God I'm here. Like, we were all incredibly grateful, and we felt privileged to be, like, laughing. And laughing in a respectful way, but, like, to be able to process process all this difficulty and confusion through scenes, through like a sense of humor. It was really beautiful. It was, I mean, the ensemble, you think of all these people as giant stars and whatever, they're each individuals, but that was not the feeling on set. The feeling on set was everyone was together and everyone was happy to be around each other, and it was like nothing I've ever experienced, ever.
Outside of the challenges of COVID, were there other challenges that you faced from a production standpoint on the movie, or did that really kind of dominate everything?
COVID dominated everything. Everything. Like movies are puzzles. They're big puzzles. You can schedule. There's different issues that come up with that, but there was it was like 6-dimensional chess. If you couldn't change the schedule if the actors in the scene weren't clear, or people couldn't arrive or leave Boston on a certain time. So it was just an extra eight layers to the regular problems of making a movie. That if you made a mistake and you hired the wrong actor who didn't test, or you allowed somebody to come in before they were clear, it could shut the whole thing down. So it was a crazy level of coordination. And we had you'll see in the credits of most movies that were made in the COVID age, there's just a ton of crew. There's a whole different department. There's enough money that we spent on COVID to make probably 2 little movies. But that's what it took to kind of keep it on track. And to Netflix's credit, that's what they gave us to make it.
And then also Kevin knows that I love exotic animals, and I have a pet hyena, Dee Dee, and Dee Dee got loose, and that was another problem. So we had a loose, wild African hyena on the set at all times that was nipping and biting people, and that was difficult. And by the way, my hyena had COVID, so it made it triply difficult. But at the end of the day, Kevin would say, and I'll never forget his tone of voice. He would say, pardon my language, why the fuck did you bring a hyena on set? And I would tell him, because she's my little baby, and at the end of the day, that little sweet hyena would curl up in my arms and snuggle, and then take a big hunk of flesh on my arm. Don't keep, and at the end of the day, the lesson we all learn, and I think filmmaking is about lessons that you learn. It's about learning about each other. And one of the lessons, beyond the fact that collaboration is beautiful, creativity is beautiful, the other lesson was, don't ever keep a hyena as a pet. They're dangerous animals.
What he said.
I didn't really sure how to follow that with anything.
It's just the truth. I mean, that's all.
It is the truth.
Don't keep a hyena as a domestic pet.
He's not.
Okay, so the two of you have been working together for over a decade, is that right? So how do you kind of divide and conquer on the producing side, for this room full of what I'm assuming is producers in this room? How do you approach working together? And especially with the myriad of projects that you have going at any given time.
So I'll start.
Okay.
And I'll throw to you.
Okay.
So what I love about Kevin Messick is I literally joke that he is forward momentum. So if I get an idea as a writer-director that I'm excited about, I throw it to him, and within a day or two, there's a studio me talking to us. And then if that becomes real, there's already a line producer, and I have never met a producer in my entire life who has the momentum and forward vision of Kevin Messick. And what I love about Kevin, it's not like he's chewing through everyone. It's not like he's like, screw everyone. He's really fair. He's really just always going forward. Once he clicks in to my creative vision, I've never ever met anyone that goes forward like this guy. And I think ultimately that's the greatest compliment you can give a producer. And when I think of Kevin Messick, he is literally a producer. And you guys all know there are all kinds of different producers. There's the producers who are good at the dinner. There's the producers who are good at hanging out. There's the producers that are in the kind of like details of the thing. And I have never met anyone with the momentum that Kevin has. But anyway, feel free to add to
I'll simplify that.
He doesn't like compliments like that. He's too busy going forward.
I think your number one job as a producer is to let your director direct, right? So anything that happens, all the bullshit that's going on, all the crazy puzzle making, drama, deals, actors, this, that, and the other, you keep it away from him or her, and let them do what they're doing, which is, in this case, writing and directing a great movie. So giving them the tools and the resources to do what they do, keeping the drama out of their lane. If there's something obviously important and relevant, obviously you kind of like fill them in on it, but you ultimately want to create a purely creative environment on set. And if you can do that, then you're actually producing a good movie, and all the other stuff that you're doing, they don't need to hear about it. They can find out about it after you wrap.
Amazing.
Thank you both so much. We've reached our time limit, so such a pleasure, and congratulations on an exquisite movie. It will stay with me for a very long time, as I'm sure it will for a lot of people in this audience.
Thank you, everyone.